Maya Chen had always trusted doctors. Growing up in Denver, Colorado, she'd been raised to believe that medical professionals were infallible guardians of health, white-coated angels who could cure anything. That faith would cost her 3 years of her life, nearly destroy her career as a graphic designer, and push her to the brink of bankruptcy. But it would also lead her to uncover a web of medical malpractice so shocking that it would change healthcare regulations in 3 states. I'd love to know which corner of the globe you're watching from. And if this story speaks to you, make sure to subscribe. Tomorrow's video is one you absolutely can't miss. The woman who almost killed her wore designer heels and spoke with the confidence of someone who had never been questioned. Dr. Patricia Brennan ruled the internal medicine department at Denver Metropolitan Hospital like a queen surveying her kingdom. She had the credentials, the reputation, and the arrogance to dismiss any patient who dared suggest she might be wrong. Maya's symptoms started simple enough: fatigue that wouldn't lift, joint pain that moved through her body like a traveling storm, and a strange rash that appeared and disappeared without warning. 3 different doctors told her it was stress. 2 suggested therapy. 1 recommended yoga. Dr. Brennan told her it was all in her head. What none of them knew was that Maya Chen had a rare autoimmune condition that was systematically destroying her organs while they prescribed antidepressants and told her to get more sleep. By the time she found Dr. Marcus Williams, a specialist willing to actually run the tests that should have been done from day one, Maya had lost 40 pounds, her job, and her faith in the medical system. But she hadn't lost her fight. The fluorescent lights in Denver Metropolitan Hospital hummed with the kind of persistent buzz that made Maya's already pounding headache worse. She clutched her purse against her chest, trying to ignore the way her hands shook as she walked down the endless corridor of beige walls and industrial carpeting. 6 months of unexplained symptoms had led her here, to what felt like her last hope for answers. Room 314, Dr. Patricia Brennan, Internal Medicine. Maya glanced at the appointment card in her palm, double-checking the room number before pushing through the heavy wooden door. The waiting room was nothing like the crowded, chaotic spaces she'd grown accustomed to at other medical offices. This one was quiet, almost serene, with leather chairs around a glass coffee table stacked with current magazines. Classical music played softly from hidden speakers. She approached the reception desk, where a woman with silver hair and kind eyes looked up from her computer screen. "Maya Chen for Dr. Brennan at 2:30, Maya said, her voice barely above a whisper. Speaking had become difficult lately, as if her vocal cords were wrapped in cotton. The receptionist's brow furrowed slightly as she scanned her screen. "I don't see you on Dr. Brennan's schedule today, honey. Are you sure you have the right office?" Maya's heart sank. After waiting 3 weeks for this appointment, the thought that she might have made a mistake was almost unbearable. She fumbled through her purse, pulling out the appointment card and placing it on the counter. "This is the address they gave me," she said, pointing to the handwritten note, "Room 314, 2:30 appointment." The receptionist studied the card, then looked back at her computer. "Oh, I see what happened. You're actually scheduled with Dr. Williams in the rheumatology department. That's room 418, 2 floors up. Dr. Brennan's office is 314, but she's in the internal medicine wing on the other side of the building." Maya stared at the card, realizing her mistake. In her exhaustion and brain fog, she'd misread the room number and wandered into the wrong department entirely. "I'm so sorry. I'll head upstairs right away." "Actually," the receptionist said, glancing at the clock on her computer screen, "Dr. Williams is running about 20 minutes behind schedule today. If you'd like to wait here until closer to your appointment time, you're welcome to. These chairs are more comfortable than the ones in rheumatology." Maya nodded gratefully and settled into one of the leather chairs. The relief of sitting down was immediate. Her legs had been aching for hours, a strange burning sensation that started in her hips and radiated down to her feet. She leaned her head back and closed her eyes, trying to center herself before what felt like the most important medical appointment of her life. "Excuse me, are you feeling all right?" Maya opened her eyes to find a man in a white coat standing beside her chair. He was tall, probably in his early 40s, with dark hair and concerned brown eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. Unlike the hurried, distracted doctors she'd encountered over the past months, he seemed to actually be seeing her. "I'm fine," Maya said automatically, the response she'd trained herself to give when anyone asked about her health. But even as she said it, she could feel the lie hanging in the air between them. The man tilted his head slightly, studying her face with the kind of attention that made Maya suddenly self-conscious. She knew she looked terrible. The weight loss had left her clothes hanging loose, and the chronic fatigue had carved dark circles under her eyes that no amount of concealer could hide. "I'm Dr. Marcus Williams," he said, extending his hand. "I don't think we've met, but you look like you might be one of my patients. Are you here for the 2:30 appointment?" Maya blinked in surprise. This was the rheumatologist she was supposed to see? She'd expected someone older, more formal. Dr. Williams had the kind of relaxed demeanor that immediately put her at ease, despite her nervousness. "Yes, that's me, Maya Chen. I'm actually in the wrong waiting room," she admitted, feeling foolish. "I got confused and ended up down here instead of upstairs." Dr. Williams smiled, and it was genuine, reaching his eyes in a way that Maya hadn't seen from a medical professional in months. "Well, since I was coming down here anyway to grab a file from Dr. Brennan's office, and since you're already comfortable, why don't we just talk here for a few minutes, save you the trip upstairs?" He pulled up a chair across from her, completely abandoning any pretense of clinical formality. Maya had never had a doctor sit down and actually face her during a conversation. Usually they stood by the door, one hand on the handle, ready to escape to their next appointment. "So, Maya, tell me what's been going on. And I mean really going on, not the abbreviated version you've probably been giving other doctors." Something in his tone, maybe the way he said "really going on," made Maya's carefully constructed composure crack. For 6 months, she'd been condensing her symptoms into neat, digestible summaries, trying to make it easy for doctors to help her. But Dr. Williams was asking for the whole truth. "It started with fatigue," she began, then stopped and shook her head. "No, that's not right. It started before that. I just didn't recognize it at first." Dr. Williams leaned forward slightly, indicating she had his full attention. "Start wherever feels right to you." A lot of love and effort went into bringing this story to life. If you're enjoying it, we'd be so grateful if you'd subscribe to our channel. Now, back to where we left off. Maya took a deep breath. "About 8 months ago, I started having these strange moments where I'd forget words, simple words like spoon or Tuesday. I'm a graphic designer, so words and communication are part of my job. At first, I thought it was just stress from a big project deadline." She paused, expecting him to interrupt with questions about her stress levels or work-life balance, but he simply nodded for her to continue. "Then came the joint pain. It would move around my body. One day, my hands would ache so badly I couldn't hold a pencil. The next day, it would be my knees or my shoulders. And there's this rash that comes and goes across my cheeks and nose. It looks like a sunburn, but I haven't been in the sun." As she spoke, Maya found herself describing symptoms she'd almost forgotten. The way her hair had started falling out in clumps in the shower, how bright lights had become painful to look at, the strange tingling in her fingers and toes that made it difficult to do detailed design work. "Every doctor I've seen has run basic blood work and told me everything looks normal," she continued. "Dr. Peterson at Denver Family Practice said it was probably just stress and suggested I see a therapist. Dr. Hassan at the walk-in clinic thought it might be a viral infection that would clear up on its own. The emergency room doctor last month said I was probably just dehydrated and needed to drink more water." Dr. Williams had been taking notes on a small pad throughout her explanation, but now he set his pen down and looked directly at her. "Maya, how long has it been since anyone ran a comprehensive autoimmune panel on you?" The question caught her off guard. "A what?" "Autoimmune testing. Things like ANA levels, anti-dsDNA, complement levels, inflammatory markers beyond basic CRP. Maya stared at him blankly. I have no idea what any of that means. No one's ever mentioned auto anything. Something shifted in Dr. Williams' expression. Not quite anger, but a kind of professional frustration that Maya had never seen directed on her behalf before. Maya, I want you to know that what you're describing, the joint pain, the rash, the cognitive issues, the fatigue, these are classic presentations that absolutely warrant further investigation. The fact that multiple doctors have dismissed your symptoms without proper testing is, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully, it's not acceptable medical practice. For the first time in months, Maya felt a flicker of hope mixed with validation. Someone was finally listening, really listening, and more importantly, someone was taking her seriously. "What do you think it might be?" she asked, almost afraid to hear the answer. "I have some strong suspicions, but I don't want to get ahead of myself. What I can tell you is that we're going to run every test necessary to figure out what's happening to you, no matter how long it takes or how many specialists we need to involve." Dr. Williams glanced at his watch and frowned. "I hate to do this, but I actually do need to grab that file from Dr. Brennan's office before my next patient. But I want you to come upstairs with me so we can get started on some preliminary blood work today. Is that okay?" Maya nodded, gathering her purse and standing up. The simple act of having a plan, of having someone take charge of her medical care with confidence and compassion, made her feel stronger than she had in weeks. As they walked toward the door, Dr. Williams paused and turned back to her. "Maya, I want you to know that whatever's going on with you, we're going to figure it out. And more importantly, we're going to make sure you get the treatment you need. You shouldn't have had to suffer this long without answers." The words hit Maya harder than she expected, and she had to blink back tears. After months of being told her symptoms were imaginary or psychological, having a doctor acknowledge her suffering felt like the first step toward reclaiming her life. She had no way of knowing that Dr. Marcus Williams was about to become not just her doctor, but her advocate, her ally, and eventually, the person who would help her expose the medical negligence that had nearly cost her everything. All because she'd walked into the wrong waiting room and met the right doctor. Dr. Williams' office on the 4th floor was a stark contrast to the sterile, impersonal spaces Maya had grown accustomed to in her medical odyssey. The walls were lined with medical journals and textbooks, but also featured photographs of hiking trails and mountain landscapes. A small coffee maker sat on a side table next to a bowl of wrapped candies, and classical guitar music played softly from a small speaker. "Please, have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Dr. Williams said, gesturing to a chair beside his desk rather than the typical examination table. "I know you've probably been poked and prodded enough for one day." Maya settled into the chair, watching as he pulled up her file on his computer. The blood work had been extensive, more vials than she'd ever given at once, with test names she couldn't pronounce. That had been 2 days ago, and the waiting had been excruciating. "Before we dive into your results," Dr. Williams said, turning away from the screen to face her directly, "I want to ask you something that might seem unusual. Have you ever heard of Dr. Patricia Brennan?" The question caught her off guard. "The doctor from downstairs? The one whose waiting room I accidentally ended up in? Not really. Why?" Dr. Williams hesitated for a moment, as if weighing his words carefully. "She's been practicing internal medicine at this hospital for 15 years. Excellent reputation, serves on several medical boards, frequently speaks at conferences." He paused. "She also had the opportunity to see you 6 months ago." Maya frowned. "I don't understand. I've never been a patient of Dr. Brennan's." "Not directly, no. But do you remember your emergency room visit here at Denver Metropolitan, the one where they told you that you were dehydrated?" The memory came flooding back. The terrible night when her joint pain had been so severe she couldn't sleep, when the rash on her face had spread down her neck and chest, burning like fire. She'd driven herself to the emergency room at 3 in the morning, desperate for help. The ER doctor that night was Dr. Rodriguez, Maya said slowly. He ran some basic tests and sent me home with instructions to drink more water and follow up with my primary care physician. That's correct. But what you probably didn't know is that Dr. Rodriguez consulted with Dr. Brennan that night. She was the attending physician on call for internal medicine, and he asked her to review your case and your lab work. Maya felt a chill run down her spine. What did she say? Dr. Williams pulled out a manila folder and opened it, revealing several pages of medical notes and lab results. According to the consultation notes, Dr. Brennan reviewed your symptoms, your presentation, and your preliminary blood work. Her official recommendation was that your symptoms were likely psychosomatic, stress-related, and that you should be referred to psychiatric services. The words hit Maya like a physical blow. She never even saw me. No, she didn't. She made that assessment based solely on Dr. Rodriguez's notes and your lab results. Dr. Williams leaned forward, his expression serious. Maya, I want you to look at something. He turned his computer screen toward her, showing a spreadsheet filled with numbers and medical abbreviations. These are your lab results from that emergency room visit 6 months ago. The same tests I ran on you 2 days ago, but with 6 months of disease progression between them. Maya stared at the screen, not understanding what she was looking at, but sensing its importance. Your ANA, that's an anti-nuclear antibody, was elevated 6 months ago, not dramatically, but enough to warrant further testing. Your inflammatory markers were also higher than normal range. Most significantly, your complement levels were low, which is a red flag for certain autoimmune conditions. Dr. Williams highlighted several numbers on the screen. Any one of these findings should have prompted additional testing. All 3 together should have resulted in an immediate referral to rheumatology. But Dr. Brennan said it was in my head? Dr. Brennan dismissed clear laboratory evidence of autoimmune activity and recommended psychiatric evaluation instead of appropriate medical follow-up. His voice carried a carefully controlled anger. Maya, I need to show you your current test results, and then I need you to ask you to consider something that might be difficult. He opened another screen, this one showing her recent blood work. Even to Maya's untrained eye, the difference was stark. Where the previous numbers had been slightly elevated, these were dramatically outside normal ranges. You have systemic lupus erythematosus, Dr. Williams said gently. It's an autoimmune condition where your body's immune system attacks your own tissues and organs. The joint pain, the rash, the cognitive issues, the fatigue, they're all manifestations of lupus. Maya felt the room spin slightly. Finally, a name for what had been destroying her life. But instead of relief, she felt a growing sense of anger. 6 months ago, you said the signs were there? Yes, your lupus was in an early, treatable stage 6 months ago. With proper diagnosis and treatment, we could have prevented much of the organ damage you've sustained. He paused, letting that sink in. Maya, your kidney function has been compromised. Your heart shows signs of inflammation. These are serious complications that could have been avoided with early intervention. The implications crashed over her like a wave. 6 months of deteriorating health, of losing her job because she couldn't function, of spending her savings on medical bills and treatments that didn't work, of being told she was crazy. All of it could have been prevented. Dr. Brennan knew, didn't she? Maya's voice was barely a whisper. Dr. Brennan had enough information to know that further testing was warranted. Whether she knew you had lupus specifically is impossible to say, but she certainly knew that your symptoms and lab values suggested a serious medical condition that required investigation. Dr. Williams closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. Maya, I'm going to say something that goes beyond my role as your rheumatologist, and I want you to know I don't say this lightly. What happened to you was medical negligence. Dr. Brennan's failure to order appropriate follow-up testing or refer you to a specialist, despite clear laboratory evidence of disease, falls below the standard of care expected of a physician. Maya stared at him, processing the weight of what he was telling her. Are you saying I should sue her? I'm saying you should be aware of your options. More importantly, I'm saying that what happened to you shouldn't happen to anyone else. He pulled out a business card from his desk drawer. This is Janet Morrison. She's a medical malpractice attorney who specializes in diagnostic errors. She's also a friend of mine from medical school who went to law school instead of residency. Maya took the card, her hands shaking slightly. I don't know if I can handle a legal battle on top of everything else. I understand completely. But Maya, I want to make you an offer, and I need you to hear me out. Dr. Williams leaned forward, his expression earnest. I want to be more than just your treating physician. I want to be your advocate. I want to help you get the justice you deserve, and more importantly, I want to make sure this doesn't happen to other patients. He stood up and walked to a filing cabinet, pulling out a thick folder. Dr. Brennan isn't just guilty of negligence in your case. Over the past 3 years, I've seen a pattern of dismissive behavior, particularly toward young women with autoimmune symptoms. You're not the first patient who's come to me with a delayed diagnosis that should have been caught earlier. Maya felt a surge of something she hadn't experienced in months. Not just hope, but purpose. What are you proposing? I'm proposing that we work together. I'll provide comprehensive documentation of your medical timeline, expert testimony about the standard of care, and evidence of how the delayed diagnosis has impacted your health. Janet Morrison will handle the legal aspects, and I'll make sure you get the aggressive treatment you need to manage your lupus. He sat back down, looking directly into her eyes. Maya, what I'm asking you to do won't be easy. Medical malpractice cases are emotionally draining, time-consuming, and there's no guarantee of outcome. But if we can prove that Dr. Brennan's negligence caused you harm, we can not only get you compensation for your medical expenses and lost wages, we can also establish a precedent that might prevent this from happening to other patients. Maya thought about the past 6 months, the pain, the exhaustion, the medical bills, the loss of her job, the isolation of being told her symptoms were imaginary. Then she thought about other women, other patients, sitting in emergency rooms or doctor's offices, being dismissed and sent home to suffer. What would I need to do? First, we need to document everything. Every doctor's visit, every test result, every symptom you've experienced, every way this has impacted your life. Then we need to get Janet to review the case and determine if we have grounds for a malpractice claim. Dr. Williams paused, studying her face. But Maya, I need you to understand something. If we do this, if we take on Dr. Brennan and this hospital, it's going to get ugly. They're going to try to discredit you, to argue that your symptoms really were psychological, to find any reason to avoid responsibility. You'll need to be prepared for that. Maya felt a fire burning in her chest that had nothing to do with lupus inflammation. For 6 months, she'd been a victim of medical negligence. But sitting in Dr. Williams' office, holding the business card of a malpractice attorney, she realized she had the opportunity to become something else entirely. Dr. Williams, she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. When do we start? The smile that spread across his face was answer enough. Maya Chen was about to discover that fighting for justice could be just as healing as any medical treatment. The law offices of Morrison & Associates occupied the 15th floor of a glass tower in downtown Denver, with floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a panoramic view of the Rocky Mountains. Maya sat in the conference room, a stack of medical records spread across the polished mahogany table, feeling simultaneously overwhelmed and determined. Janet Morrison was nothing like Maya had expected. Instead of the stern, suit-wearing attorney she'd imagined, Janet was a woman in her early 40s with curly red hair, wearing jeans and a blazer, who spoke with the kind of directness that immediately put Maya at ease. Before we dive into the legal aspects, Janet said, settling into the chair across from Maya, I want you to know that Marcus called me personally about your case. In the 12 years I've known him, he's never done that. He's genuinely concerned about what happened to you. Dr. Williams, who had insisted on attending this initial consultation, looked slightly embarrassed. I just think Maya deserves to know all her options. And she does, Janet agreed, opening a leather portfolio. But Maya, I need to be completely honest with you about what we're looking at here. Medical malpractice cases are incredibly difficult to win, especially against a physician with Dr. Brennan's reputation. We're going to need to prove not just that she made an error in judgment, but that her actions fell so far below the standard of care that they constitute negligence. Maya nodded, though her stomach tightened with anxiety. Dr. Williams explained some of that. What exactly would we need to prove? 4 things, Janet said, counting them off on her fingers. First, that Dr. Brennan owed you a duty of care, which we can establish through the consultation she provided to the emergency room. Second, that she breached that duty by failing to recommend appropriate follow-up care. Third, that her breach directly caused you harm. And fourth, that we can quantify that harm in terms of medical expenses, lost wages, and pain and suffering. Dr. Williams leaned forward, pulling out a folder thick with documents. I've been working on the medical documentation since Maya and I first discussed this. What I found goes beyond just her case. He spread several patient files across the table, each with names redacted but symptoms clearly visible. Over the past 3 years, I've treated 7 women who were initially seen by Dr. Brennan for autoimmune-related symptoms. All 7 were dismissed with recommendations for stress management or psychiatric evaluation. All 7 had laboratory evidence that should have prompted further testing. Janet's eyebrows rose as she examined the files. This suggests a pattern of behavior, which could be crucial for our case. Marcus, are you willing to testify as an expert witness about the standard of care? Absolutely, but I want to do more than that. Dr. Williams turned to Maya. I want to help you understand exactly what happened to your body during those 6 months of delayed treatment. It's important for the case, but more importantly, I think it will help you process what you've been through. Over the next hour, Dr. Williams walked Maya through her medical timeline with a thoroughness no doctor had ever shown her before. He explained how lupus attacks the body's connective tissues, how the inflammatory process damages organs over time, and how early treatment could have prevented much of the deterioration she'd experienced. Your kidney function declined by 30% during those 6 months, he said. Your heart developed pericarditis, inflammation around the heart muscle. The joint damage in your hands and wrists is permanent. These aren't just numbers on a lab report, Maya. These are real physical consequences of delayed diagnosis. As he spoke, Maya found herself opening up about aspects of her experience she'd never shared with anyone. The nights when the pain was so intense, she'd sit in her bathtub at 3 in the morning, running hot water over her swollen joints. The morning she'd looked in the mirror and not recognized herself, her face so changed by the characteristic lupus rash and weight loss. The day she'd had to quit her job because she could no longer hold a design pen steady enough to do detailed work. I kept thinking I was going crazy, Maya admitted, her voice breaking slightly. When doctor after doctor told me it was stress or suggested it was psychological, I started to believe them. I actually made an appointment with a psychiatrist, thinking maybe I was having some kind of breakdown. Janet had been taking notes throughout the conversation, but now she set her pen down. Maya, what you're describing is called medical gaslighting. It's unfortunately common, especially for women presenting with autoimmune symptoms. The fact that you began to doubt your own perception of your symptoms is actually evidence of the psychological harm caused by the delayed diagnosis. Dr. Williams nodded grimly. It's particularly problematic in Dr. Brennan's case because she has a history of this behavior. But Maya, I want you to know that your instincts were right all along. You knew something was seriously wrong with your body, and you were right to keep seeking help. The validation hit Maya harder than she expected. For months, she'd been second-guessing herself, wondering if she was being dramatic or oversensitive. Hearing a medical expert confirm that her symptoms had been real and serious all along felt like a weight lifting from her shoulders. There's something else, Dr. Williams said, exchanging a glance with Janet. I've been doing some research into Dr. Brennan's background, and I found something interesting. 3 years ago, she published a paper on psychological factors in autoimmune disease presentation. The paper argues that many patients presenting with autoimmune symptoms are actually suffering from anxiety or depression manifesting as physical complaints. Janet leaned back in her chair, a knowing look crossing her face. That could explain the pattern of dismissive behavior. If Dr. Brennan has a professional bias towards psychological explanations for autoimmune symptoms, it could support our argument that she failed to provide appropriate medical care. But it also means she's going to have published research to back up her approach, Maya said, her heart sinking. Won't that make it harder to prove she was wrong?
Not necessarily, Janet replied. Science is about evidence, not opinions. We have your lab results from 6 months ago showing clear autoimmune markers. We have documentation of how your condition progressed without treatment, and we have expert testimony from Marcus about what the standard of care should have been. Dr. Williams pulled out one final document, a letter on the official hospital letterhead. I submitted a formal complaint to the hospital's medical review board about Maya's case. They're required to investigate any allegations of substandard care. Maya read the letter, seeing her story reduced to clinical language and medical terminology. But somehow, seeing it officially documented made it feel more real, more legitimate. "What happens next?" she asked. "Next, we file a formal malpractice claim," Janet explained. "That starts a process called discovery, where we get access to all of Dr. Brennan's records, not just the ones related to your case. We'll also depose Dr. Brennan, which means she'll have to answer questions under oath about her treatment decisions." The thought of facing Dr. Brennan directly made Maya's stomach churn. "Will I have to testify?" "Yes, but not right away. First, we build the strongest possible case using medical records and expert testimony. By the time we get to your deposition, you'll be thoroughly prepared, and Marcus will be there to help explain any medical concepts." Dr. Williams reached across the table and placed a reassuring hand on Maya's arm. "Maya, I want you to know that this is going to be emotionally challenging. Reliving your medical trauma, having your credibility questioned, dealing with the stress of litigation, it's not going to be easy. But I also want you to know that you're not going through this alone." He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. "I've never gotten this involved in a patient's legal case before. Usually, I provide medical records and move on. But what happened to you, it's not just medical negligence. It's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed. I'm committed to seeing this through, whatever it takes." The intensity in his voice surprised Maya. She'd grown accustomed to doctors who seemed eager to end appointments and move on to their next patient. Dr. Williams was different. He seemed genuinely invested in her well-being beyond just treating her lupus. "Why?" she asked quietly. "Why are you doing all this for me?" Dr. Williams was quiet for a moment, staring out the conference room window at the mountains beyond. "Because I became a doctor to help people, and the system failed you in a way that could have been fatal. Because I've seen too many women dismissed and ignored when they're trying to advocate for their own health. And because," he looked back at her, his expression serious but warm, "because I believe you deserve better than what you received." As they left the law office that afternoon, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope mixed with purpose. She wasn't just a patient anymore, or a victim of medical negligence. She was someone fighting back, with allies who believed in her cause. Walking across the parking garage with Dr. Williams, she realized that this partnership had become about more than just her individual case. They were taking on a system that had failed her and potentially many others like her. "Dr. Williams," she said as they reached their cars, "thank you for everything." He smiled, and Maya noticed that his concern for her well-being extended beyond his professional obligations. "Call me Marcus," he said. "I have a feeling we're going to be working together for a while." As Maya drove home through Denver traffic, she caught herself smiling for the first time in weeks. The battle ahead would be difficult, but she wasn't fighting it alone. Maya's phone buzzed at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night, jolting her from the restless half-sleep that had become her norm since starting lupus treatment. The caller ID showed Dr. Williams' office number, which seemed odd for such a late hour.
"Maya, it's Marcus. I'm sorry to call so late, but I'm still at the hospital, and I've discovered something that changes everything about your case." The urgency in his voice sent adrenaline coursing through her system. "What kind of something?" "I can't discuss it over the phone. Can you meet me tomorrow morning? Early, before the hospital gets busy. I'll be in my office by 7. Maya was already reaching for her calendar. "Of course. Marcus, is everything okay? You sound—" "I'm angry," he said simply. "Angrier than I've been in my entire medical career. I'll explain everything tomorrow." The line went dead, leaving Maya staring at her phone in the darkness of her bedroom. Sleep became impossible after that. She spent the remaining hours until dawn researching medical malpractice cases online, trying to imagine what could have prompted such an urgent call. Dr. Williams' office at 7 in the morning was a different world from the bustling medical center it would become in a few hours. The hallways were empty, except for night shift nurses finishing their rounds, and the only sounds were the distant hum of medical equipment and the soft whisper of ventilation systems. Maya found Marcus pacing behind his desk, his usually neat appearance disheveled. His shirt was wrinkled, his tie loose, and there were dark circles under his eyes that suggested he hadn't slept any more than she had. "Maya, thank you for coming so early." He gestured to the chair she'd come to think of as hers. "What I'm about to show you is going to be difficult to hear, but it's also going to strengthen our case immeasurably." On his desk sat a stack of manila folders, each marked with a red "Confidential" stamp. Beside them was a laptop computer and what appeared to be printed emails. "Yesterday afternoon, I submitted a formal request to review all consultation records involving Dr. Brennan over the past 3 years. As department colleagues, I have legitimate access to these files for quality improvement purposes." His voice carried a bitter edge. "What I found was a pattern of behavior that goes far beyond your case." Maya settled into her chair, bracing herself for whatever revelation had kept him up all night. Marcus opened the first folder, revealing a patient file with identifying information redacted. Jennifer Martinez, 28 years old, presented to the emergency room 14 months ago with joint pain, fatigue, and a facial rash. Dr. Brennan was consulted. Her recommendation was anxiety medication and stress management. He opened a second folder. Lisa Thompson, 32, gave a similar presentation 8 months ago. Dr. Brennan's recommendation, psychiatric evaluation for possible somatization disorder. A third folder. Sarah Chen, no relation to you, 25 years old, 6 months ago, presented with the classic lupus butterfly rash, joint swelling, and positive ANA levels. Dr. Brennan recommended a dermatologist for the rash and suggested the patient was catastrophizing normal stress responses. Maya felt sick to her stomach. How many are there? 12 cases in 3 years where Dr. Brennan was consulted on young women presenting with autoimmune symptoms. 12 cases where she recommended psychological treatment instead of medical follow-up. Marcus's hands were shaking slightly as he handled the files. "Maya, I tracked down as many of these patients as I could through our hospital system. 5 of them now have confirmed autoimmune diagnoses. 2 have significant organ damage that could have been prevented with early treatment." The magnitude of what he was telling her began to sink in. This wasn't just about her individual case. It was about a systematic pattern of dismissing women's health concerns. "There's more," Marcus continued, turning to his laptop. "I found email correspondence between Dr. Brennan and other physicians. Look at this." He angled the screen toward Maya, showing an email thread from 8 months ago. Dr. Brennan had written to a colleague, "These young women with their Google diagnoses and their demands for every exotic test under the sun. Half of them just need a good therapist and some perspective on what real illness looks like." Maya read the email twice, feeling a mixture of rage and vindication. Here was documented evidence of Dr. Brennan's dismissive attitude toward young female patients. "And this one," Marcus said, scrolling to another email. "From 6 months ago, right around the time of your emergency room visit." This email was longer, discussing several cases. Maya's breath caught when she saw a reference that could only be about her. Latest ER consultation, 29-year-old female, classic presentation of stress-induced symptoms masquerading as autoimmune disease. Referred for psychiatric evaluation. These patients need to understand that not every ache and pain requires extensive medical workup. "She was talking about me," Maya whispered. "Yes. And the most damaging part is this response from Dr. Rodriguez, the emergency room physician who treated you that night." Marcus scrolled to show Dr. Rodriguez's reply. "Patricia, are you sure about the psych referral? Her lab showed some interesting patterns. Elevated ANA, low complement levels. Might be worth having rheumatology take a look." Dr. Brennan's response was time-stamped just 20 minutes later. "Trust me, James, I've seen hundreds of these cases. Young women under stress often present with vague autoimmune-like symptoms. Rheumatology referral would be a waste of resources and would only reinforce her illness behavior." Maya felt the blood drain from her face. She actively talked him out of referring me to rheumatology? "Yes, Dr. Rodriguez wanted to send you for proper evaluation, and Dr. Brennan convinced him not to." Marcus closed the laptop and leaned back in his chair. "Maya, this isn't just negligence anymore. This is deliberate interference with appropriate medical care based on gender bias and preconceived notions about young women's credibility. The room felt like it was spinning. Maya had known that Dr. Brennan had failed to recommend proper follow-up, but learning that she had actively prevented it was a different level of betrayal entirely. What does this mean for the case?
It means we have her dead to rights, Marcus said grimly. We have documented evidence of bias, a pattern of dismissive behavior, and specific proof that she interfered with your medical care. Janet is going to have a field day with this. He stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the hospital parking lot where early shift workers were beginning to arrive. But Maya, I need to tell you something else. I didn't just discover these files by accident. Maya frowned. What do you mean? Marcus turned back to her, his expression conflicted. Dr. Amanda Chen, the rheumatologist who treated Sarah Chen, came to me yesterday. She'd heard through the medical grapevine that I was building a case against Dr. Brennan. She wanted to know if I'd found other patients with similar stories. And? She told me she's been quietly documenting cases like this for 2 years. Young women dismissed by Dr. Brennan who later came to her with advanced autoimmune disease. She's been trying to figure out how to address it without destroying her own career. Maya felt a spark of hope mixed with her anger. So we're not alone in this? No, we're not. Dr. Chen has agreed to serve as an expert witness in your case. She's also prepared to file her own complaint with the state medical board about Dr. Brennan's pattern of care. Marcus sat back down, leaning forward intently. Maya, what started as a single malpractice case is becoming something much bigger. We're looking at a systematic pattern of discrimination that could affect hospital policy and possibly state medical guidelines. The weight of responsibility felt crushing. Maya had just wanted justice for what happened to her, but now she was potentially representing dozens of other women who had been dismissed and ignored. I don't know if I'm strong enough for this, she admitted. Marcus reached across the desk and took her hand, a gesture that was both professional and deeply personal. Maya, you're one of the strongest people I've ever met. You survived 6 months of being told your pain wasn't real. You fought for answers when everyone else gave up on you. You have the courage to take on one of the most respected physicians in this hospital. He paused, his expression softening. And you won't be doing it alone. Dr. Chen and I are committed to supporting you through this entire process. Janet has already said she's willing to take this case on contingency because she believes it could set important legal precedents. Maya looked down at their joined hands, surprised by how natural the gesture felt. Over the past weeks, Marcus had become more than just her doctor. He'd become her advocate, her ally, and something that felt dangerously close to a friend. What happens next? Next, we meet with Janet and Dr. Chen to review all this evidence. Then we file an amended complaint that includes the pattern of discriminatory behavior and the active interference with your medical care. Marcus squeezed her hand gently before releasing it. Maya, I want you to know that what we're doing here could prevent other women from going through what you experienced. As Maya left the hospital that morning, she felt the weight of purpose settling on her shoulders. This case had evolved from seeking personal justice to fighting for systemic change. The thought was both terrifying and empowering. Walking across the parking lot, she noticed Dr. Brennan's Mercedes pulling into a reserved parking space near the hospital entrance. For a moment, Maya considered approaching her, confronting the woman whose negligence had nearly destroyed her life. Instead, she took out her phone and called Janet Morrison's office. Janet, it's Maya Chen. We need to meet as soon as possible. I think we're about to change everything. The conference room at Morrison & Associates had been transformed into a war room. 3 weeks after Marcus's late-night discovery, the mahogany table was covered with medical files, legal documents, printed emails, and timeline charts that mapped out Dr. Brennan's pattern of negligence. Maya sat between Marcus and Dr. Amanda Chen, facing Janet Morrison and 2 associate attorneys who had joined the case. The deposition is scheduled for Thursday, Janet announced, reviewing her notes. Dr. Brennan will be under oath, and we'll have 6 hours to question her about her treatment decisions, her consultation practices, and these emails we've uncovered.
Dr. Chen, a petite woman in her 40s with silver-streaked hair and intense dark eyes, leaned forward. I've prepared a comprehensive analysis of each case where Dr. Brennan's recommendations deviated from standard autoimmune protocols. The pattern is undeniable. Maya tried to focus on the legal strategy being discussed, but her mind kept drifting to what would happen when she finally faced Dr. Brennan across a conference table. The woman who had dismissed her suffering without ever looking her in the eye would be forced to answer for her actions. Maya, Janet's voice cut through her thoughts, I need you to understand what Dr. Brennan's legal team will try to your deposition next week. They're going to attempt to discredit you personally, to suggest that your symptoms were indeed psychological, and to argue that any delay in diagnosis didn't materially affect your outcome. Marcus shifted in his chair, his jaw tightening. That's exactly the kind of gaslighting that caused this problem in the first place. I know, Janet replied, but we need to be prepared for it. Maya, they might ask about your stress levels, your work situation, your personal relationships, even your mental health history. It's invasive and it's frustrating, but it's part of their defense strategy. The thought of having her entire life dissected by hostile attorneys made my stomach churn. But then she thought about the 12 other women whose files sat on this table, and her resolve strengthened. I can handle it, she said quietly. What I can't handle is the thought of Dr. Brennan doing this to someone else. Dr. Chen nodded approvingly. That's the spirit we need. Maya, I want you to know that your courage in pursuing this case has already started making changes. Word has gotten out at the hospital about the investigation. 3 more women have come forward with similar experiences. 3 more? Marcus looked up sharply from the file he'd been reviewing.
Yes. And here's what's interesting. They're all from the past 6 months. After your case started gaining attention, Dr. Brennan seems to have become even more dismissive of young female patients, possibly feeling defensive about her methods being questioned. Janet made a note on her legal pad. That could actually work in our favor. It shows a pattern of behavior that persisted even after she should have known her practices were under scrutiny. Thursday morning arrived with an early October snowfall that blanketed Denver in pristine white. Maya stood at the window of the downtown law office building, watching Dr. Brennan's black Mercedes navigate the snowy parking lot. Even from 5 floors up, she could see the woman's confident stride as she made her way toward the building entrance. "She's here," Maya announced to the room. Marcus stood beside her at the window, close enough that she could feel the tension radiating from his body. "Are you ready for this?" Maya straightened her shoulders, smoothing down the navy blazer Janet had suggested she wear. Professional, but not intimidating. "I've been ready for this since the night she dismissed my pain without ever seeing my face." The deposition room was smaller than Maya had expected, with a long table surrounded by leather chairs and a court reporter stationed at one end with her stenography machine. Dr. Brennan sat across from Maya, flanked by 2 attorneys in expensive suits. Up close, she was exactly as Maya had imagined, perfectly coiffed blonde hair, designer clothing, and an expression of barely contained irritation at being questioned. Janet wasted no time with pleasantries. "Dr. Brennan, please state your full name and credentials for the record." Dr. Patricia Ann Brennan, MD, board-certified in internal medicine, 15 years of practice at Denver Metropolitan Hospital, department chief for the past 8 years. And on the night of March 15th of last year, you were the consulting internist on call when Maya Chen presented to the emergency room, correct? Dr. Brennan's attorney, a sharp-faced man named Thompson, leaned forward. "Objection, leading. This is a deposition, not a trial. I'm allowed to ask leading questions. Dr. Brennan, were you consulted about Ms. Chen's case?" "Yes, Dr. Rodriguez asked me to review her presentation and laboratory findings." "And you recommended psychiatric evaluation rather than rheumatological consultation, despite elevated autoimmune markers?" For the first time, Dr. Brennan's composure flickered slightly. "I recommended appropriate care based on my clinical judgment and 15 years of experience." Janet pulled out a printed email and slid it across the table. "Is this your email to Dr. Rodriguez from that night where you state that Miss Chen's symptoms were stress-induced and that rheumatology referral would be a waste of resources?" Dr. Brennan barely glanced at the email. Yes, that's my correspondence. And what medical training or specialization do you have in psychiatry or psychology that qualifies you to make a psychiatric diagnosis? I didn't make a psychiatric diagnosis. I suggested that stress could be contributing to her symptoms. Marcus, sitting beside Maya, made a note on his legal pad. He could see his handwriting. No psychiatric training. Check board certifications. Janet continued relentlessly. Dr. Brennan, in your 15 years of practice, how many young women presenting with autoimmune symptoms have you referred for psychiatric evaluation versus rheumatological consultation? Dr. Brennan's attorney objected again, but Janet pressed on. We have documentation showing that over the past 3 years, you've recommended psychiatric care for 12 women presenting with autoimmune symptoms. How many men with similar presentations received the same recommendation? The pause was telling. Dr. Brennan shifted in her chair, her professional mask beginning to slip. I don't recall the specific gender breakdown of my recommendations. Would it surprise you to learn that the number is 0? That not a single male patient with similar lab values received a recommendation for psychiatric evaluation? That's... Dr. Brennan started, then stopped, clearly recognizing the trap. Janet leaned forward. Dr. Brennan, I'm going to read you a quote from an email you sent to Dr. Williams 6 months ago. These young women with their Google diagnoses and their demands for every exotic test under the sun. Half of them just need a good therapist and some perspective on what real illness looks like. Do you remember writing that? Maya watched as Dr. Brennan's facade finally cracked. Color rose in her cheeks and her hands clenched into fists on the table. Those emails were private, professional communications taken out of context. What context would make it appropriate for a physician to prejudge patients based on their age and gender? I don't prejudge anyone. I make clinical decisions based on medical evidence and professional experience. Janet pulled out Maya's original lab results from 6 months ago, spreading them across the table. Medical evidence like these laboratory findings showing elevated ANA, decreased complement levels, and inflammatory markers consistent with autoimmune disease? Those findings can be seen in many conditions, including stress-related disorders. Dr. Brennan, Marcus finally spoke, his voice carefully controlled. Can you cite any peer-reviewed research showing that stress causes the specific pattern of lab abnormalities seen in Miss Chen's case? Dr. Brennan's attorney placed a warning hand on her arm, but she was already answering. Stress can manifest in numerous physical ways. Any competent physician knows that. That's not what I asked. I asked for specific research showing that stress causes decreased complement levels and positive ANA titers in the ranges seen in Miss Chen's case. The silence stretched uncomfortably. Dr. Brennan looked at her attorney, who shook his head slightly. I don't have specific citations with me today, she finally admitted. Janet seized the moment. Dr. Brennan, are you familiar with the term medical gaslighting? Objection, Thompson interjected, inflammatory and irrelevant. It's directly relevant to the standard of care, Janet shot back. Dr. Brennan, have you ever considered that your approach to young women with autoimmune symptoms might reflect unconscious bias rather than medical judgment? Dr. Brennan's composure finally shattered completely. She leaned forward, her voice rising. I have dedicated my career to helping patients. I don't appreciate having my professional judgment questioned by attorneys who've never practiced medicine. But you do appreciate questioning the judgment of young women who know their own bodies. Maya spoke for the first time, her voice quiet but steady. Dr. Brennan turned to look at Maya directly for the first time since entering the room. Miss Chen, I understand you're upset about your diagnosis, but I'm not upset about my diagnosis, Maya interrupted, meeting her gaze steadily. I'm upset that you had the information to help me 6 months earlier and chose not to act on it. I'm upset that you convinced Dr. Rodriguez not to refer me to rheumatology when he wanted to. I'm upset that 12 other women have suffered because you decided their pain wasn't worth investigating.
The room fell silent, except for the soft clicking of the court reporter's machine. Dr. Brennan stared at Maya, and for a moment, something that might have been recognition flickered in her eyes. "The evidence was ambiguous," she said finally. "No," Maya replied, her voice growing stronger. "The evidence was clear. What was ambiguous was whether you thought a young woman deserved the benefit of the doubt." Dr. Brennan's attorney called for a recess, but the damage was done. As they filed out of the conference room, Maya felt a strange sense of completion. She had looked her dismissal in the face and refused to be dismissed again. Marcus fell into step beside her in the hallway. "Maya, that was remarkable. You stood up to her better than I could have." "I had to," Maya replied, "for me and for all the others." As they waited for the elevator, Maya caught sight of Dr. Brennan through the conference room window, slumped in her chair with her head in her hands. For just a moment, Maya felt something that might have been pity. Then she remembered the 6 months of pain, the lost job, the nights of wondering if she was losing her mind, and the pity evaporated. The elevator doors opened, and Maya stepped inside, ready for whatever came next. 6 months later, Maya stood at the podium in the packed auditorium of the Colorado State Capitol building, looking out at an audience of lawmakers, medical professionals, patient advocates, and journalists. The bright television lights were harsh, but she no longer felt small under scrutiny. The woman who had once been dismissed as hysterical now commanded attention as an expert on medical bias and patient advocacy. Senate Bill 247, known as the Maya Chen Patient Protection Act, represents more than just legal reform, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber. It represents a fundamental shift in how we approach medical care for women and marginalized patients who have been historically dismissed by the healthcare system. In the front row, Marcus Williams sat beside Dr. Amanda Chen, both wearing small smiles of pride. Behind them, Janet Morrison was taking notes, already working on similar legislation for neighboring states. The settlement with Dr. Brennan and Denver Metropolitan Hospital had been finalized 3 months ago, a substantial financial award that had allowed Maya to focus on advocacy work full-time. But the money had never been the point. The real victory was sitting in the gallery. 15 women whose cases had been brought to light through Maya's lawsuit, all of whom now have proper diagnoses and treatment plans. Jennifer Martinez, the first woman Dr. Brennan had dismissed, had become Maya's closest ally in pushing for legislative change. The bill establishes 3 key protections, Maya continued. First, mandatory second opinions for any recommendation of psychiatric care when physical symptoms and abnormal lab values are present. Second, gender bias training for all physicians receiving state medical licenses. And third, patient advocates available in every major hospital to ensure that dismissed patients have someone fighting for their right to appropriate care. Dr. Patricia Brennan was notably absent from the proceedings. Her medical license had been suspended pending review by the state medical board, and Denver Metropolitan Hospital had quietly asked her to resign. The investigation triggered by Maya's case uncovered a pattern of behavior so egregious that even her former supporters had distanced themselves from her practices. As Maya answered questions from the legislators, she caught sight of a familiar face in the back of the auditorium. A young woman, probably in her 20s, with the hollow-eyed look of someone who had been fighting for medical answers. During the break, the woman approached her hesitantly. "Miss Chen, my name is Rachel Torres. I've been having symptoms for 8 months. Joint pain, fatigue, rashes that come and go. I've seen 4 doctors, and they all say it's stress." Her voice trembled slightly. "I saw your story on the news, and I wondered, could you help me find someone who would actually listen?" Maya felt the familiar surge of protective anger, but this time it was channeled into purpose rather than helplessness. "Rachel, let me give you Dr. Williams' contact information. And I want you to have this." She handed Rachel a small card that had become her signature, a business card for the Maya Chen Foundation, a nonprofit she'd established with part of her settlement money. "We help women navigate the healthcare system when they're being dismissed. You're not alone, and you're not crazy." Watching Rachel walk away with hope instead of despair reminded Maya why she'd chosen this path rather than simply disappearing with her settlement money. That evening, Maya found herself back at Denver Metropolitan Hospital for the first time since her deposition victory. But this time, she was there for a celebration. The hospital had announced the establishment of the Patient Advocacy Center, funded in part by the settlement and staffed by specially trained nurses and social workers whose job was to ensure that no patient fell through the cracks the way Maya had.
The dedication ceremony was held in the hospital's main conference room, the same space where Maya had once sat with Marcus, learning the devastating truth about her delayed diagnosis. Now it was filled with medical staff, administrators, and community members celebrating a new approach to patient care. Dr. Rodriguez, the emergency room physician who had originally wanted to refer Maya to rheumatology, approached her during the reception. "Miss Chen, I owe you an apology. I should have trusted my instincts that night instead of deferring to Dr. Brennan's recommendations." Maya studied his face, seeing genuine remorse. "Dr. Rodriguez, you're not the one who needs to apologize. You wanted to do the right thing. The system failed both of us that night." "The new protocols we've implemented ensure that emergency physicians can override consulting recommendations if they feel additional testing is warranted," he said. "What happened to you will never happen again on my watch." Across the room, Maya spotted Marcus deep in conversation with the hospital's new chief of internal medicine, Dr. Sarah Kim, a woman who had built her career on research into autoimmune diseases and gender bias in medicine. The hospital had made the strategic decision to replace Dr. Brennan with someone whose expertise directly addressed the problems that had been exposed. Marcus caught Maya's eye and excused himself from his conversation, walking over with the easy smile she'd come to associate with good news. "How did the legislative hearing go?" he asked. "The bill passed the committee unanimously. It should go to a full vote next week." Maya accepted the glass of sparkling cider he offered her. "Marcus, I need to ask you something, and I want you to be honest." His expression grew serious. "Of course." "Do you ever regret getting involved in my case? Your career would have been simpler if you just treated my lupus and moved on." Marcus was quiet for a moment, looking around the room at the celebration of changes that had grown out of Maya's suffering. "Maya, 18 months ago, I was a good rheumatologist who helped individual patients manage their diseases. That was meaningful work, but it was limited." He turned to face her directly. "Because of your courage to fight back, we've changed how an entire hospital system approaches patient care. We've influenced state legislation that will protect thousands of future patients. We've forced a reckoning with gender bias that most of the medical establishment wanted to ignore." Maya felt tears prick her eyes, but they were tears of accomplishment rather than pain. "More than that," Marcus continued, his voice softer, "working with you has made me a better doctor and a better advocate for my patients. I've learned to listen more carefully, to question my assumptions, and to fight harder for people who need someone in their corner." "Dr. Williams, Marcus," Maya corrected herself, "I need you to know that you saved my life, not just medically, but in every way that matters." The moment between them was interrupted by Jennifer Martinez approaching with a small group of the other women whose cases had been connected to Dr. Brennan's pattern of dismissal. "Maya," Jennifer said, "we wanted to thank you before the evening ended. None of us would have proper treatment if you hadn't been brave enough to fight." Lisa Thompson, whose lupus had progressed to kidney involvement before she finally received proper care, nodded emphatically. "You gave all of us our voices back." Sarah Chen, the other Chen, whose name coincidence had initially confused the medical records, stepped forward. "We've been talking, and we want to do something to honor what you've accomplished." She handed Maya a framed photograph showing all 15 women whose cases had been reviewed standing together at the state capitol during the legislative hearings. At the bottom, in elegant script, were the words, "Because one woman refused to be silenced, 15 others found their voices." Maya stared at the photograph, overwhelmed by the reminder that her personal fight had grown into something much larger than herself. "There's something else," Jennifer added with a smile. "The medical school here at the university wants to include your case in their curriculum. They're developing a course on patient advocacy and medical bias, and they want to use your story to teach future doctors how to really listen to their patients." The thought of medical students learning from her experience, of future doctors being trained to recognize and combat the kind of bias that had nearly cost Maya her life, felt like the ultimate vindication. Later that night, Maya stood on the balcony of her new apartment,
purchased with settlement money but chosen for its view of the mountains rather than its luxury. Her lupus was well controlled now, under Marcus's careful management, and while she would always live with the organ damage caused by the delayed diagnosis, she had her life back. Her phone buzzed with a text message from Janet Morrison. Maya got a call from an attorney in California. They have a case remarkably similar to yours, and they want to know if you'd be willing to consult. Interested in taking this fight national? Maya smiled, looking out at the city lights of Denver spread below her. 18 months ago, she had been a sick woman that no one would believe. Tonight, she was someone with the power to change systems and save lives. She typed back, "Send me the details. We have work to do." The fight that had started in a hospital waiting room where she'd ended up by mistake had become her life's purpose. Maya Chen had found her voice, and she intended to use it to make sure no other woman would have to endure what she had suffered. In the distance, the lights of Denver Metropolitan Hospital glowed against the mountain backdrop. Somewhere in those halls, Marcus Williams was probably still working, caring for patients with the enhanced awareness and advocacy skills their partnership had taught him. Somewhere else in the city, Rachel Torres was scheduling an appointment with a doctor who would actually listen to her symptoms. And somewhere across the country, other women were fighting battles similar to the one Maya had won. Battles they might now have a better chance of winning because one woman had refused to accept dismissal as an answer. Maya stepped back inside her apartment and opened her laptop. There were emails from patients seeking guidance, journalists requesting interviews, and advocacy organizations wanting partnership. She had work to do, and for the first time in years, she felt truly healthy, not just physically, but purposefully alive. The graphic designer who had once struggled to hold a pencil now held the power to reshape how medicine treats the voices of women, and she was just getting started. Looking for more? We've got 2 amazing stories ready for you right on screen. If this one touched you, these are absolutely worth your time. Click to watch them now. And hey, subscribe and hit that bell to never miss our latest uploads.